Hi everyone, it's Ileana and I have another card to share with you today. This card took me a little bit of trial and error trying to figure out the easiest way to do this, and so here goes. I'm using two stamp sets. One is from Simon Says Stamps called Spring Flowers, and the other one is from Hero Arts. It was the stamp set that Jennifer McGuire had designed for her kindness campaign. I've taken two pieces of Bristol Smooth cardstock and I've prepped them with my embossing tool, and it just lays down a little bit of powder down so the oils from your finger or static from the paper keeps the embossing powder from sticking to the areas you don't want. And I've stamped my design onto, or my stamp onto the front of my cardstock with some Versamark. And I am making two cards at one time, but you'll only see one later on. And I did do a trial run, a dry run earlier, and so I just left my stamps mounted. And I'm going to leave them mounted because I have a plan, and you'll see it at the end. So I'm just using some clear embossing powder to emboss my flower. And I'm going to heat up, I'm going to check first to make sure that there's no stray embossing powder, because I'm going to be doing some ink blending with my ink blend tool. I forget what that thing is called. And so I want to make sure that there's no stray embossing powder, because it will prevent the color from going into that area. I've stamped my image with some black ink onto some repositionable label. I use that as my masking paper, and I fussy cut around it and I just overlaid it where I stamped. You have to be very careful because your embossing powder that you used was clear, and so you pretty much have to put it exactly where it is. I'm just using some distressed ink, and I started with the shaded lilac, and I'm working from the middle and going out. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm going to be putting some darker color on the edges, and I don't really want to waste my time with putting color on the outside of the card. Now I've moved on, and I'm using some Dusty Concord, and I sped this up quite a bit. It's about 8 times faster. So you'll see me whiz through this. It did take a long time. And what I did notice from my earlier dry run was that my fingerprints kept leaving marks on the paper. And so I'm just using this scrap piece of cardboard, just a place to rest my hand so that I could work with the distress ink. And the piece of cardstock is cut a little bit bigger than an A2 card front. And so I know that if I get too much on the edges, that I could trim it down just a little bit. And I'm going back and forth between the shaded lilac and the Dusty Concord just to get an even blend. And now I am using the Seedless Preserves, and no, I didn't use Seedless Preserves. I used the Wilted Violet. And so I'm going back and forth between the blending tool, and you can see that I used a round sponge on my rectangular tool, and it works just fine. And now that all the blending is complete, I am using my MISTI upside down. What I did was I didn't want to get my fingerprints on it while I was coloring my flower, and so I'm just putting the cardstock onto the back of the MISTI, and then I'm using some scrap paper to put my hand on, to rest it on there. So I'm just buffing off any of the distress ink that was on the sentiment. And now I'm just going to paint my flower with my Zig watercolors. And like I said, I didn't want to rest my hand on the distress ink because I didn't want to leave marks from my the side of my hand. So I'm just using the magnets to hold it down. And this way, I suppose you could do your coloring on your craft mat, but this way I could tilt it up so I can have everything secure, and I just tilt it up. I'm only using 2 colors for the flower. I can't tell you what colors I used because I just don't remember. I just picked two colors that I know would blend together, and I'm just coloring it in. And I'm not being too careful with how my strokes are, but I am being careful on the edge of the embossing line, trying not to go over. And now I'm kind of using a little bit of an orange color so that I could blend those together. I don't really use my zig markers very much, just simply because I just haven't taken the time. There's just so much craft supplies and so little time. So I kind of forced myself to use them this time. I'm just taking my brush and just using the water that's in the brush to drag the color around and just cause it to blend. And then when my brush gets loaded up with the color, I just wipe it off on a spare piece of cloth that I have there. Now for the stem, I left this part in because it is such a dainty little stem that I needed my handy dandy magnifying light to help me to get to those nice little crevices. And so I just left this part in so that you could see that everyone needs a little help. I'm just taking 2 different shades of green. One is a regular green and one is more like a yellow green. And now that it's all blended together and now that it's dry, I'm going to go back to it and I'm going to use my embossing tool again, and I'm just putting another coat on it because I'm going to emboss on it again. So this time I am going to use iridescent ice. It's a Stampin' Up, it's like a glittery clear embossing powder. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to overstamp this, and because my stamps are in the same spot, they'll land perfectly on my project. And so now I'm adding my powder, and I wanted to use the iridescent ice because it's like there's a spotlight on the flower and everything is shining right on it, and it gives the illusion that it's creating this halo around this flower. I'm just taking a little dry paintbrush and I'm brushing away any stray embossing powder because since it has a sparkle, it'll show up. And I've trimmed my card panel down and I'm just mounting it onto a piece of Stampin' Up Dazzling Diamonds glitter paper. And I'm just using a scrap piece of foam to push down my paper. And once it's all mounted, I will add it to the front of a card base. And I used a lot of adhesive on my card base. And then what I will do is I will take the foam insert out of my mini MISTI, and I'm going to use that to help position my card front onto the card base. And I'll make sure that it's pressed down well. And now I'm going to add a little bit of pearls. I'm not sure what these things are called. They're just to the front of the card. And I want one to go right in the center of the flower at the base. And then I have these little tiny, tiny pearls that came from Close to My Heart. And I'm going to use those as well. Those seem to be the first ones that I use out of every pack, and so it was really nice that this pack from Close to My Heart just has tiny ones. So I'm just going to place some around the sentiment, and then I'm going to put one final one right where there would be a period at the end of a sentence. And that's it. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Have a great day.